Hooker against Charles Oliveira. Where do you guys fall on that? Right? I mean, it's just a feeler. And by the way, if you come back aces, that fight will go and get made. Heard about this yesterday. Dan Hooker had said, "Hey, I don't care. I'll fight anybody, but it looks like this is the direction the UFC is going in." I found that interesting for a couple of reasons. First off, that's fast. To be given news, to have news and idea of what's next or where you're going next within 24 hours after your fight, that's fast. Generally, if you would have information like that, that's a meaningful fight. That would be an important match. I can think of times, well, Shogun had a win. I'm going way back. I'm going 20 years ago. Daniel Lorenzo, right after the fight, he's still sweaty. He'd walk into the locker room and offer him Chuck Liddell. I mean, there was a lot of times where it had to move forward. We need an answer quickly because we got a press conference. Like, I would just wonder why. I would wonder why that idea. I don't know that it was an offer, by the way. I do not believe that Dan Hooker was offered Charles Oliveira. I believe Dan Hooker had a conversation that made him believe that they're leaning that direction and see what happens. But that's still very, very fast to have an answer like that. We have world champions. Tom Aspinall doesn't know what's next. Just for example, he's been out of the ring for 3 weeks. So I do have to look at that. I would really wonder what they would be fighting for. I would very much be wondering, why are those two getting matched up? I mean, again, to go back to the example that I have of Shogun, where that happened, or to go back to our reigning champion in Tom, where that did not happen. What kind of placement do you think that fight would get? Hooker versus Oliveira. Are we on pay-per-view? Because that would change things, right? You can see where it wasn't. You could see where that would be a main event. But if we're talking about pay-per-view, which is where Hooker's last fight was and where Oliveira's last fight was, and even their fights before that and the one even before that. So we keep on pay-per-view. We know that's not a main event. And would that be a top contenders match? Islam has competed with both of them, but there is somebody in this world that wants to see Charles fight Islam again. I realize it's none of you. I get that. But there is somebody whose opinion gets listened to that does. So, is that what we're working on here? Are we working on trying to get Charles back to this spot that people aren't asking for, but has been offered repeatedly to him? A spot that he has said in his own words in every platform you can, from typing it out on social media to telling people in interviews to having an interpreter relay it to the local news. I don't want to fight Islam. Is that what this is? Go out there. What if we shine Charles up? Because if that's the case, I'm wide open to it. If that's the case, and I would suspect that it is, particularly if we got to start to get some kind of parity going, right? We don't know if Circarian's going to stay in that spot. We don't know if Islam's leading the division. He's going to vacate as we're trying to get new blood. But I would ask you, would Dan also qualify for a title shot? I don't think you would agree. So, okay, if Dan doesn't qualify for a title shot, so it's not a number one contender for Dan, but it would be for Charles, which, by the way, I'm making this stuff. Like, I don't have this information, but I'm trying to work through it, and I'm a pretty reasonable guy. And I'm very good at letting history, but my trajectory to the future. So if we are going to look at it, it's not for Dan. Dan goes out, gets a jump on Charles. He does not go and fight for the world title against Islam. All right. But if Charles beats Dan, he more than likely will be offered for the 4th time a fight that he has made crystal clear he does not want to do. Then it would seem I've answered my own question of why did this information get to Team Hooker so quickly? And it would come back to somebody giving the shine to Charles Oliveira. And I'm just wondering where you guys sit with that. I wonder what you think about that. A lot of those 55-pounders have fought each other. Like, it's not the world's easiest thing to do. If you can find some parity, if you can find something new with top guys, you almost have to do it by default. You want to know something, by the way? I owe an apology. I want to get my apology in. It was stated from Connor Burks, tatted Dan Hooker is undefeated and about to be ranked in the top 5. And I wrote him back and said, well, you're half right, and that's an improvement. I have to apologize to Connor. Hooker got ranked in the top 5. That should not have happened. I'm surprised that that happened. We don't know who that rankings committee is, but I think we can comfortably understand that Connor is one of them, and they spoke, and that's how they did it. But it comes back to the other point that I'm having with you, which is you don't have a lot of those top guys who would be new, who haven't already tangled with one another. And then you have the top guys that could greatly be served in one way, but they're going to take a very big risk. And that is to call out Patty. The big fight that people would like to see you do, the big fight that's going to get the most reception and the most media and the most interview, which is how you make it anywhere in this business. Or you could go and fight a guy that's plus 35, coming off of a loss. Somebody somewhere wants him back in the ring with Islam. It's one of those things, right? So what they're going to do at 55, it's a perennial division, and for the longest time. And Tony Ferguson's the one that did this, and no one's ever given him any credit. Tony Ferguson is the one that gave an opportunity to Charles Oliveira in the first place, somebody that wasn't in the top 5. Tony was the top 5 guy that let somebody else come in and join the party. And Oliveira wasn't any better at that point. He just wasn't in there with the big names. And that all changed with Tony. So 55's got a lot of things to do. Got to figure out who the champion's going to be. And we got to do something big for Dan. And a lot of people backed my idea of a BMF. A lot of people jumped on that. And it just seems like whether we get there or not, it seems like that talk is very responsible and very respectful towards what we saw Dan Hooker did, not to mention the body of his career. That's how you get into the BMF. I mean, I'm just saying, it would seem as though the suggestion of Charles Oliveira, which came in record time, and ultimately they'd be fighting for no reason at all. And I don't submit for you that they fought Gamrot for any reason. There's sometimes you make fight for entertainment. Like, I do understand that. I'm just saying, if you're one of the guys and you got any stroke or any pull, which doesn't come along very often, but it happens to be something that Hooker's got in the palm of his hand right now, that's the times that you don't have to play that. You can start doing things because they matter and because they do have purpose, not just for entertainment and one night. And I think while the talk is still existing of, man, get this guy into a BMF, get this guy with a trajectory somewhere, and there's no reason that you couldn't have 2 hammers fight, and that's the number 1 contender for a BMF, by the way. But when you got one guy and you're trying to get him with a victory and take him into a world title fight that he clearly does not want, he can't be any clearer that he doesn't want that. And the other guy is just an afterthought. It's one of these things. It's one of these things that I would really proceed with some caution. I would proceed to find the right partner. I would proceed and I would look into Chael's little conspiracy speculation. Why do I know about this? Why was this presented in any fashion, whether it was an offer or conversation starter? Why? Do I already know the direction they're looking and Tom Aspinall does not? Why did my phone ring? Why did my manager's phone ring? Why have I been told? Why do I even know the name and the idea? One day in, Charles Oliveira.